To ensure that this episode starts off in the greatest way possible, I took the liberty of Googling funny quips so that we could properly start off this episode in a way that is both intelligent and humorous. So what we're going to say now is maybe the funniest quip of all time.
Or
you can't fit. Oh, what's that, Jacob?
Or at least the funniest quip on Pinterest.
This is the funniest quip on Pinterest. I am in full agreement with you. You can't fix stupid, but you can numb it with a 2x4.
That's a good one. Pinterest out here was probably the funniest quip. They have very good taste.
It's because you hit a person on the head.
Yeah.
You do violence to their cranium.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good one. Thank you, Pinterest, for advocating for violence.
Anyway, I'm done with Pinterest. Welcome, one and all, to the Session 0.5 podcast. It's been a little while, but Jacob went on vacation.
Yeah.
And I respect going on vacation. But now we're both here. We're ready to do the podcast. So without further ado, introducing my guest this week. My name, of course, as always, it has not changed yet, is Theo Basin. And my guest this week, I've mentioned him on the podcast before, many a time, maybe once an episode, except for maybe like one. It's Jacob, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've been featured in this podcast more mentioned than actually been on it. But
you are the man in the van behind the scenes.
Yep, that's me.
Every time I record this show in my long, rich person kitchen with a wooden table in it, Jacob is outside in a conspicuous white van telling me if I need to be funnier or more informative.
They're not supposed to know that's me.
Well, a little behind the scenes.
The inside scoop, if you will.
Yeah. All right. Without further ado, let's move on to the main advice segment. Jacob suggested this week's main advice segment. So, do you want to take it away?
Sure. I have been interested in D&D for a while, but one of the things I was most interested in starting was making a character, and something that really intrigued me about the game was sort of when your character dies, what should happen in the game just in general. And I was wondering if you had any takes on, as a DM, what to do when there's a character death.
Yeah, I think me as a DM and player, and you as a player, we could get some interesting perspectives on this. So I think starting off, character death, like the idea that there could be character death, is one of the things that makes the game most interesting. That your character is not just like a video game character that can respawn at any moment. Sure, you can roll a new character, but that character who's died can't just come back. And I think I've maybe mentioned this story before. I can't entirely remember. But my brother, for one of my games, wanted to make a character who was immortal. And I said no, because that would greatly lower the stakes. So character death is pretty important to me in terms of the game. It is definitely a sad thing that happens, but it's not something to be like afraid of,
Yeah, I think it adds some balance as well for the players to know that it's possible that their experience could just end, but it's also sort of a way to introduce the idea of making new characters and coming up with more creative decisions, or even tying in old characters that could become a PC character where you could play as somebody who's already there, and I think there's a ton of creative freedom, especially in D&D, where you can kind of make wherever you want depending on the campaign.
Yeah, if you have if your character has a relative who exists as an NPC, you can always play them, or you can think of a new character concept entirely. Uh, all sorts of things like that. Um, I think a big question in the realm of character death is whether or not uh, it makes it too hard on the players. Like, I remember one time, I don't think I was running a game where a character died, but I was talking to my mom about a character who died in maybe one of Ethan's games or something. And she was like, "Isn't that your fault as a DM that that character died?" And I would venture to say, no, it is not the DM's fault. Because there are just circumstances when the dice don't go your way and when the events just lead up to, uh, unfortunately, the worst for your character. We shouldn't blame our DMs for that. Uh, we should thank them for being faithful to what's happening in the game.
And I think it's very important to note that in D&D, isn't always final. There are some classes that have resurrection spells. You can bring back up characters, but it's still a threat, which makes it a lot more interesting, I think, on the players.
Yeah, every tabletop game has its own different rules for death. I can go through some of them. 5e, um, you have your certain amount of hit points, and then you'll fall to 0 hit points in some certain circumstances. That doesn't mean you're automatically dead right off the bat. That means you have fallen unconscious. Once you have fallen unconscious, a couple things can happen. Either your friend with a healing spell can come over and give you some hit points and bring you right back up. Uh, or if you don't get healed because of whatever circumstances, you will have to roll death saving throws. Each turn, you roll one of your death saving throws. Um, you have to beat a 10 on the dice. You have to make a 10 or beat it to succeed, and that marks a success for your character. Or if you get a 10 or lower, that is a failure. If you get 3 successes, your character is stabilized. They are still at 0 hit points, but they aren't dying anymore. But if you get 3 failures, your character dies. There's also like other circumstances. If you roll a 20 on the die, you will come back up automatically with 1 hit point. And then I think a nat 1, where you roll 1 on the die, counts as uh, two automatic failures, I think is the rule. If
I,
not just immediate death. I don't think it's immediate death.
I think also if you get hit while you're down, which a DM normally wouldn't do because it's kind of not bad manners, but it's not exactly in the greatest point to do that. I think that also
Mm.
counts as 2 failures, which
Yeah.
that in that case it might be reasonable to blame the DM. But
That is one thing. Whereas, like, if there's 5 other people in your party and your character's on the ground and the DM just hard focuses your character to kill it in the next few rounds, that is a bit mean. There are circumstances where, like, uh, if you like make it known before in like a session 0 or something that this is going to be a game where the DM is going to go harder on your characters and is going to make the tactical decisions to kill them, they might send enemies after you and hit you while you're down. But generally, in a casual game, the DM is going to move on and try to knock down everybody before, unfortunately, getting into the killing part of it.
yeah,
Uh, and that kind of leads. Oh, I also said I was going to talk about another tabletop game. I think Monster of the Week. I'm fairly familiar with the death rules for that one. That one, you have a certain amount of harm that you can take at any given time. Um, that's like the equivalent for hit points if you're a D&D player. And if you take a certain amount of harm, I think it's like 4 harm, your wounds move to fatal. And when your wounds move to fatal, then you only have like about 2 or 3 points of harm left before you before you die. And when your wounds are fatal, they steadily get worse over time. So even without getting hit, you can start to take harm. But I think same with D&D, you can take a couple of different types of actions to bring someone back up. But getting into the nitty gritty of like hitting characters when they're down, and the unfortunate circumstance where you end up knocking down all the characters, comes the total party kill, the TPK, which I think is pretty a pretty straightforward concept across most RPGs, where the party loses and they lose very hard, because it results in the killing of every member of the party. And this is Jacob. I don't think I've told you this before. I've done a TPK.
I did not know that actually.
I've done a TPK. Weirdly enough, I did it in a way where my party kind of loved it. But I will explain. You remember the Hell game I ran for you guys?
I do, yeah.
So I adapted that same game into like a 3-session thing for YPI, my YPI group that I talked about a couple episodes ago when Mia was on. And instead of like historical figures escaping from hell, because we didn't want to risk like in a space where it's not just my friends from school, we didn't want to risk like anyone being offended if like someone made Hitler, which is always, you know, a worry that you can have in any circumstance. If somebody creates Hitler, watch out for them. But instead we played as different fictional characters from all sorts of stories. I think we had like Ursula from The Little Mermaid, some random anime characters that I'm unfamiliar with, that kind of thing. But the final boss fight came about, and the odds were not stacked in the party's favor, not just because of the abilities of the boss enemies, but also because of the actions of the players themselves. My friend Mia actually played in that game. Her character was trying to game the system and was going to try to find the Infinity Gauntlet
That's a
in the
new
Vault of
one.
Hell, assuming that one, Thanos was in hell, two, they would have secured the Infinity Gauntlet from Thanos so that he would not be able to use it. And so she spent the entire fight running in the opposite direction of the boss enemy, which was Satan, of course, to get the Infinity Gauntlet. I had another character who was trying to like make it seem like they were helping Satan, while actually trying to aid the party a little bit, so they weren't doing any damage to Satan at the end of the day, and only like 2 or 3 characters actually fighting Satan. So they got rolled. But what was cool about it, and here's a thing you can do, DMs out there, I let them narrate their own characters' aftermaths. So when they inevitably died, I let them have a say in, what happened to their character, what kind of afterlife they ended up in. Did they end up just back in hell? Did they manage to escape? Well, probably not manage to escape, because the only character that didn't die was Mia's character, who got the Infinity Gauntlet successfully and narrated her own thing for her character. But that's the thing you can do. Don't stop the creative freedom in a game where creative freedom is the number one thing, you know?
Yeah, I think that's very important. I also enjoy that you adapted that game for them, because I thought that concept for the one shot was very interesting, and I also think that seeing the contrast between our 2 different endings is very funny to me, because ours, I believe you talked about it before, was very like almost accidental but very coordinated, and then
Yeah.
it ended up like working way too well with a minor detail from the beginning of the game of Satan having a jumbotron to turn the entirety of hell against him, and I thought that was very
Yeah.
funny. But
Yeah,
then,
it's so funny that you guys entirely skipped that fight,
Yeah, and then you can
and the
see
other group.
their notice of the details of the vault, which
Yeah.
Mia focused on a lot to try to obtain the gauntlet, and it just
Mm.
shows that people have really different approaches. But a total party kill in that scenario, I can definitely see it because Satan was a difficult boss to deal with when
Mm.
we retconned to fight him, and even with our group who were all attacking him, I think we either barely made it or it was very close. But uh,
Plus, you guys were a party of 7, all attacking Satan, so it was a lot better. And Satan was like a lich, which is one of the most powerful enemies in the game. Um, so yeah, it was kind of wild. And I didn't mention that. Yeah, that's funny that you bring it up. Even though they were able to game the system and skipped the boss fight, they asked me like at the end of the game if they could like retcon it because they wanted to see what the boss fight would be like, which was very sweet of them.
well, we didn't want you to throw away all your preparation, so and I think it was pretty
That's
fun.
okay. I'm perfectly okay with throwing away my prep.
Plus, we didn't do too much combat as the level 10 characters that we had, so we wanted to try it out.
Yeah, that is also true. So there's a couple more character death related things that I think we could address here. I'm looking at our notes to see what we haven't addressed yet. Um, Number one, we touched on a little bit, and we'll get to this even more in depth. What should a DM do when a character dies? Because I think I have some ideas for that as well. And then here's one that I don't think we've touched on, so I think we should get a little more into it. When should you go easy on the players? I think there's a couple of specific circumstances that I would go easy on the players. If it's session one, brand spanking new level 1 characters and you've accidentally ramped up the enemies to a degree that they weren't quite prepared for, maybe they're new players, I think then it's okay to pull some punches so that everybody doesn't die.
Yeah, I think that's especially important because when making your first character for a campaign, it's usually, in my experience, the most thought out character that you have, and you have a total usually maybe even a plan for their future, but you have a plotted out
Mm,
backstory that you want to get into, and having it be hard on them on the first session, facing near death, sort of maybe discourages the player to sort of develop their character like that, where they
yeah.
might not be able to show off that they created this huge backstory and future for their character.
Yeah, if you have a player who's super excited and then their character dies forever session 1, they're gonna think in their mind, "Oh, this is what the game is normally like." So I shouldn't prep my characters because they're just gonna die. Like you don't want to discourage that level of creativity that they have. An instance where I will like pull punches. Another one. I pretty much never pull punches anymore. I never fudge. The only thing that I'll do is if a character's pet is fighting and I cannot stop myself from doing this, I will assign the larger hit to the character and not the pet. Say an enemy is going to attack a character and their animal companion. And I did this for Welby and Hogna Jacob, which was Jacob's ranger and his spider beast companion. I will assign the larger hit to the character so that I don't kill the pet
And I mean,
because I really don't want to kill the pet.
even in that circumstance, I can bring back the pet with I think it's 50 gold pieces or
Mm,
herbs totaling to that amount. But I understand because this I think is even a broader thing. But like you grow attached to the characters' pets and the characters themselves. So it's really, discouraging to have to see your character's pet die and then you have to bring him back because it's sort of the concept, not really the actual situation, if you know what I'm trying to say.
yeah. If you have a character who has a dog that they and the entire party has come to love very much, and you roll a nat 20 against them, and you go, oops, nat 20, here, I just killed your dog in one hit. That is
Especially in
going
a
to reflect
scenario where
poorly.
they can't bring them back, like
Yeah.
uh, an NPC that joins the party as a pet.
Mm,
It's a lot worse.
yeah. I think those were the only two instances where I pull punches. I like to try to make combat uh, as challenging but not overly challenging as possible. So then, last thing, what should a DM do when a character dies? So I gave that example earlier of allowing characters to narrate their own paths. I think also if you like in between rounds where they're rolling their death saves, describe them seeing something like strange and otherworldly, whether it be some sort of afterlife. Maybe it's their god that the player character worships, and they have a conversation with them. Maybe they see a dead relative or something like that. Don't just make them stay on the ground for a long time because that's kind of boring. This is an opportunity to like describe a cool situation that they're now in, and get a little creative with them. Do some RP and stuff like that.
Another thing that I think Ethan started in their campaigns, when we started his their first one, their first Everon, right?
Yeah, it was
Was
Eberron.
keeping death saves in, well, we've been playing on Discord because of the pandemic, in DMs and in private because it's sort of like broadcasting to the group that you have two fails sort of would change their actions from what they would normally do to try to
Mm,
save you rather than attempt to continue the fight how either their character would play it out or it would interrupt the sort of role play that's already going on, which I think it's both good and bad for the whole game as a whole because it puts you in more dangerous situations while you're down, but it also encourages characters or players to play as their characters more. So it's sort of
yeah.
a balance.
Another thing, getting even like deeper into that I had a person suggest to me the other day was having the DM roll their death saves, so even they don't know if they're succeeding or failing. If you really are worried about the metagaming, excuse me, that much, then you can have someone else entirely roll your death saves, so that even you don't know what's going to happen. If you even if you want like a little mystery and a little wonder and suspense into whether or not your beloved character is going to make it out of this one.
That seems really like suspenseful to me. I don't know if I could deal with
It
that.
does seem really wild. I don't know. I don't often have to have characters roll death saves, but I feel like I like Ethan's idea of keeping it in DMs. I think I'll probably continue to use that one mostly.
I don't know how we'll do that in person, but we'll figure it out.
Write it on a little piece of paper, hand it over, whisper it in my ear, that kind of thing. Whisper sweet nothings.
I, I think it's I think it's better, but I know maybe some other people wouldn't think that way because
Hmm.
they don't want to see their characters die. But again, I think it's an important part of the game. So,
As always, do what's going to work for your table and you.
and discuss it with your table as well. See if they're interested. It has to be a balance between you and the players if you're the DM or everyone at the table to see what they want to do.
Absolutely. All right, Jacob, as the forger of this topic, is there any other avenues we haven't explored yet that you would like to go down?
Um, I think another one that would be it sort of ties into this topic is more rigorous campaigns with like harder combat and more overall death. I think sort of has different implications depending on how the DM handles it because
Mm-hmm.
I think death is important, but too much death can cause like the creation of shallow characters or incomplete characters or like players losing their characters that they want to play. And I think that the DM and players really have to work out how hard they want a campaign to be before they start.
Yeah. For example, we were talking about this. We played literally yesterday. We were talking about this after this game the other day. My first campaign that I ran, Islands of Hazavag, the characters were super powerful. So it was much more like story based, and they could kind of roll whatever encounter that they came by. But now my modern day campaign in New York still pretty thick with narrative, but the fights are a lot harder. There are a lot less rest opportunities, and it's just so it can get a little darker sometimes. But I think we've and correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob. I think we've communicated that to each other, and we're all kind of on board.
Yeah, I think it's going pretty well. I think I know, especially Kyle and Steve were not as experienced during
Yeah,
Isles, so I think it's a lot better for them to have the experience now. And during Isles, there was sort of a story element that sort of we had to keep our characters alive. There was a whole prophecy,
there was a prophecy. Yeah,
so it was important. But I think now that we have that experience of like a game where we feel kind of safe, I think it's going to be interesting to see as we progress into this new campaign how everyone's going to handle the looming fear of death that's actually present this time.
all sorts of interesting stuff like that. All right, I think we've explored this topic pretty well. We've stuck our pickaxes into the mines of character death. Now it's time to move on to news. All right, first news, courtesy of Ethan, because I would have never known that this news existed until he DM'd me on Discord about it. This is also kind of old, a little bit old at this point, because it's been a while since we recorded an episode, and I planned this episode a couple weeks or so ago. But there's new unearthed arcana for D&D 5th edition. We love new unearthed arcana. So for this unearthed arcana is very focused around new draconic options. So it includes stuff like new draconic races, new traits for kobolds to bring out the more dragony side of them, and then there's also some new feats and some new spells. So we have things like the chromatic dragonborn and the metallic dragonborn. The new kobold features, there's stuff like draconic legacy options, where you get 3 options for different abilities that your kobold character can have, and you can choose one to make you a little more dragony. And there's also like a draconic roar ability, which is pretty cool. And then the feats are also race based. They're gift of the chromatic dragon, gift of the metallic dragon, and gift of the gem dragon. And then there's of course some cool spells like draconic transformation, which allows you to kind of get like a flying speed and some blind sight, stuff like that. And then there's things like summon draconic spirit, where you can, like the other summon spirit spells, you get to summon a little spirit, but it's actually a large dragon spirit that has some cool abilities. So there's a pretty clear theme in this Unearthed Arcana.
I did read through this Unearthed Arcana just earlier, and I like took a particular fascination with the new like Dragonborn sub races, particularly the I believe it's Gem Dragonborn. Seems really interesting to me because, like, as with the other ones, some these have new abilities that haven't been seen before, but these ones seem really cool, both like in combat and out. Specifically, psionic mind, which I believe is a feature of another race where you can talk telepathically. I think
Mm.
that's very cool for a Dragonborn to have. And then I believe, uh, didn't you have a one shot where somebody played a kobold already?
I did. We played a pirate themed one shot just last week where Ethan played a crazy pyromaniac kobold artillerist artificer named Don.
Um,
Don. He wore cargo shorts and sunglasses and had a lot of explosives. That was his whole thing.
I think
Very fun
the
character.
expansion on the dragons is very cool though. I can't say I expected it, but
Hmm.
I like that they're fleshing out the like some different areas.
Yeah, I have heard that some people think Dragonborns are kind of underpowered, so that might be a reaction to that opinion that's held by some. But yeah, it's super cool to see. There's one more piece of news we have, an article that I found. This is from dicebreaker.com. Disability focused Dungeons and Dragons supplements raise funds for Bristol Children's Hospital play team. So I'll read this little bit of the article for the introduction here. Community creator and Bristol Children's Hospital play team member Isaac Cook Khan has released a pair of Dungeons and Dragons 5e supplements to raise funds for the organization's continued efforts. In partnership with online awareness project D&D Disability, Khan developed a subclass for paladins called the Oath of Accessibility, along with an in-game ready NPC paladin named Rapunzel Human. So this is super cool. I think this is like the combat wheelchair that came out not too long ago. At this point, we now have an entire Oath of Accessibility for paladins, which is super cool.
And I did notice that recently. I don't remember how long ago it was, but they did add the combat wheelchair. And sort of people like to create characters similar to themselves, but a lot of people with disabilities didn't have the representation in game, like under official content. And I think that people making stuff like this is really cool and inclusive to other people who maybe before couldn't feel like they fit in as much
Mm.
when making a character that they couldn't relate to them as much. And I think this is really cool, just that somebody took this initiative and that they were able to do it.
Yeah, having that representation in media for all types of people is so important, and it's really cool to see some people taking an action to see that change that they would like to see in the world. That's it for news, unless Jacob, you have anything.
No, that is all I think.
Yeah, that is it for news. So we're going to take a quick break. We will be right back in just a few seconds or minutes, however long I decide to make the break when I edit this. Bye for now. All right, we are back, and it's time for the best part of the podcast, not the presidential fact, but shill time, everybody. You are, of course, listening to the Session 0.5 podcast. You can find us on our YouTube channel where we will be posting every episode, just called Session 0.5. You can also find us on Twitter at Session05pod. That's SESSION 05 POD. And of course, you can always email us any questions or stories or comments or insults or whatever you have at our email, which is hold on one second, which is called Session 0.5pod at gmail.com. That's SESSION 0.5pod at gmail.com.
And it might be read on a session.
It might be read. Isn't that wild? Wouldn't you want that to happen? I would want that to happen. That's all I'm saying.
Your insult could be read on the 0.5 podcast. Session 0.5.
Theo, I've never seen your face, but you look like an egg. I will read that if you say that to me. I will read it loud and proud. I'll tell you, you're right, random person who emailed this to me. I do look like an egg. Anyway, eggs aside, it is now time for the presidential fact. The unremarkable presidential fact, one might say. And this week's fact, or we're actually gonna give you two facts this week, is about former President Rutherford B. Hayes. Did you know, audience at home and Jacob, that Hayes did not serve alcohol at the White House? His wife served lemonade instead, earning her the nickname Lemonade Lucy.
That's pretty incredible.
Isn't that just so interesting?
I wouldn't say remarkable, though. Not
No.
quite that far.
Not quite that remarkable, which of course is the point. And then one more fact, a little bit more remarkable. The B in Rutherford B. Hayes stands for Burchard.
Burchard.
That's not a name.
I refuse to believe that, but it says it on this page.
You can't call someone Burchard. That's not. You just brutalized the name Richard.
He tried to put a tree, like his favorite tree, into his middle name.
And it didn't
That's
work.
what he came up with.
It was bad. Did you just imply that Rutherford B. Hayes chose his own middle name?
Yep. I think it's very possible.
He picked it. This was his fault. He didn't have a middle name and he decided on Burchard. And now he can't go back. Oh, that's funny to me. All right. This may or may not end up being a shorter episode, depending on how long this next segment takes. But we are doing a first-time segment here on the Session 0.5 podcast because I rarely ever get questions from you guys. Shame on you. Email us and tweet at us. I decided to take the initiative and ask you guys the questions. So I ventured forth to twitter.com, went on my Twitter page and typed this and tweeted it out to the world. I said, question for all the hashtag D&D players out there. What did you think that Dungeons & Dragons was like before you started playing? And an additional question for non-D&D players. What do you currently think D&D is or is like? And before we get into some of these lovely Twitter replies, Jacob, do you have an answer for this question?
I kind of do. The only real experience I had before with D&D was the whole stereotypical nerd thing, and then the first episode of Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Where the basic idea I had was that it was a board game that people played, and now I can tell that idea was a little far from the truth. Now we don't really play with a board, but I think it's the Stranger Things actually provided a lot of people with an introduction that they may not have had before. I'm not sure how successful it was at getting people into D&D, but I think a lot of people at least recognize the name now, at least.
Yeah, Stranger Things was huge for D&D. There's even like a official Stranger Things supplement for 5th edition now, which is super cool. My experience with D&D was with my friends when I was like 10 or 11 years old. They had played like a little bit with like their older siblings and stuff. This was actually like even before 5e came out. This was like either 3.5 or 4e. None of us knew the rules like at all, and it never went well. So in my mind, D&D was super dumb and boring and all math. So I hated it. And then I watched Dimension 20, which is an actual play show that I've mentioned on here before, and I fell in love with the idea. And then, as I've also said before, Ethan reached out to me, and Jacob as well, and I fell in love with the actual game, and that's why I'm here talking about it right now.
Yeah, we started off with a neighbor of Ethan's actually
Mm-hmm.
for at least my first actual game, and it was. I think that having a DM who I didn't like really know personally before was actually a very good introduction to the game because it sort of taught me the basics and how to how the interactions differ in game and out of game. Even though we didn't do much role playing, I think it was a really cool experience.
Yeah, I will always say this. It is the funniest thing in the world that Ethan had an experienced DM literally next door. Like, we were so lucky in that regard. But I think it's time to get into some of these Twitter replies. The first one being from Ethan himself. You can follow Ethan at IRL Breakfast on Twitter if you'd like to. He tweets a lot about like Overwatch League if you're into that sort of thing. He said in response, I legitimately had no clue whatsoever beyond the fact that there were dice and pencils and paper and the DM had a screen, all of which I only knew from Stranger Things. It wasn't until I started listening to a D&D podcast that I actually learned what the hell was going on. So once again, we have a Stranger Things exposure thing here.
As well as a podcast,
And a
actually.
podcast. So kind of two birds, one stone. This next one is from Lush at Lush Michael on Twitter, who says, I only started at the start of last year and totally expected basement dwellers and oddballs, but I found that most of the community is my kind of oddball, blushing smiley face. Yeah, this is the sweaty nerd preconception, which is only partially true.
Yeah, I would say there's a little truth in there,
We're
actually.
nerds, but we're not all sweaty, okay? Only some of us are sweaty, and that's okay. We shouldn't shame others for the amount that they sweat. The next one is from Laidback DM on Twitter at SteveStillStand, who says, When I started playing in 81, I was the first person to buy a copy from our store. No one in my school or town knew what it was until I ran our first game. Then it spread like wildfire. So no initial preconceptions, smiley face. So this guy's been playing for a while. Since 81.
That also seems like an incredible experience to introduce your entire like town
Yeah, that's
to the
wild.
game and have everyone playing it. That's really cool.
That is very cool. Next reply comes from many_bubble at many_bubble on Twitter, who says, KOTOR with paper and non-laser swords, which KOTOR, if you're not familiar, is Knights of the Old Republic, which is a Star Wars video game. So it seems like they took the idea of RPG video game in their minds and thought that's what D&D was like, of course, with paper and non-laser swords. I'm pretty sure, though. Sorry, was that?
I mean, in a way, it is kind of similar to a video game, so they weren't too far off.
They weren't too far off. And I'm pretty sure there are Star Wars RPGs, TTRPGs out there that I haven't played. I can't remember entirely what they're called. But I know that they exist because I've seen things about them on Reddit. If we have any Star Wars TTRPG fans listening, feel free to tell me about those because I would be interested in learning more. All right, that is all our replies that we got. Thanks so much to everybody for replying. You've provided content for the podcast, and you are officially a hero. Yes, this is the metric that decides whether or not you are a hero, whether or not you give me content for my podcast. All right. Without further ado, I think that's all that we have for today. Any final thoughts, Jacob, you want to give to the people?
No, not much. I think we talked about a lot of cool stuff. I think that this was a cool experience. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Thanks so much, as always, everybody, for listening. Look out for all the future episodes that we're going to produce, and we will see you all later. Have a good day/night. Goodbye.
Goodbye.